Hey, beautiful people, it is me, E.L. Winston here, your favorite dyslexic book nerd here at BlaqueOUT Magazine, and I had the awesome opportunity to read this awesome book, Queer Happens Here, and I've been blessed to have the author of that book here, Marc Zinaman. Please introduce yourself to my readers.
Hi everyone. Yeah, thank you for having me. And yeah, Marc Zinaman here. Excited to
Thank
talk
you,
today.
thank you so much. Thank you for hanging out with me today.
Thank
Um,
you for having me.
Absolutely. Um, I am usually not a coffee book reader, right? But when I saw the book, I had to have it. I had to check it out, and um it was educational, eye-opening. I think it's probably amongst my top 10 reads of the year thus far.
Wow. Thank you. That's really nice to hear.
Definitely, like, just reading a book got me to go look for other things, like um the part about the women's prison and how close it was to where the Stonewall riots happened. I had no idea, and so then I had to go get one of the books that you mentioned in the book. I had to go get
Yeah,
that again.
Hugh Ryan's book, Women's House of Detention. Yeah, it's a great
Yes,
book.
great book. I love that. Um, so you write in the introduction to the book that shares some of your personal passions for this project. How would you say you have been changed personally by going through this process?
Yeah, so I mean, as I mentioned kind of in the introduction, this whole book and the project that started before it even was sparked just by me being a native New Yorker. And, we're never taught LGBTQ plus queer history. I certainly wasn't. And yet I grew up here and, walked all these streets that were kind of rich in queer history and had all these venues that, had been long gone, but I didn't know about them. And so, by the time I started going out, I grew up in Manhattan's Upper West Side, and there was only one gay bar left in the neighborhood. But once I started to do research, I had learned that there used to be a lot. So I think getting to work on this project and then this book, has sort of rewired the way that I now walk through the city. It's you know I like now kind of just anywhere I go, I'm like, oh yeah, that's where this was, and that's where that was, and so that's like a whole different way of just observing the place you come from and the place you grew up. And, I think it's also just helped me also reoriented my own place in queer lineage and history, digging into, other books and archives and libraries and just, interviewing. I also did a lot of interviews with queer elders, which I had never really gotten to do before. And so that sort of, lets you just have a better picture of where your people come from, so yeah, now when I like pass just like a bodega on the street or something, I'm like, oh yeah, that used to be a lesbian bar, or that's where these trans folk used to hang out, and so that really just I think has changed the way that I see my city. And I think also just more personally, it's expanded my own sense of accountability. I started kind of this project just wanting to learn the history for myself, and then I ended up turning it into an Instagram and now this book, and that kind of made me feel responsible for making sure these stories are preserved and shared. And
I,
people like learn about things that they didn't know about before. So that's the whole point.
exactly. Like, it's so dope. Like now, I visited New York like a year ago in December, and so now since reading the book, I'm like, yo, I can't wait to go back so I could be like, so this is where, yeah, in this part, I'm super finna make a trip.
Yeah, the book has a map at the back, so hopefully that can be helpful of all the
Yes,
places where they are. Yeah.
definitely. Like, I'm gonna be walking through the city with the book open. Like,
It's good. It's a little heavy for that, but I mean, you're welcome to try. Yeah.
maybe I should just take a pic. I'll work it out. Um, you specifically acknowledge the disconnect between our community youth with some of our community elders. How do you see us changing this disconnect, and do you think we should begin making that a part of our pride events?
Yeah, I mean, I do think the disconnect was probably worse when I was growing up than it is now. I mean, I at least, or at least I'm more educated of things. You know, there's definitely organizations and efforts out there like Sage or the Generations Project who are working, to bridge the gaps and bring together queer elders and queer youth. But then I think, this project made me also realize or think about that my generation, our generation, is kind of one of the first to have a fairly like robust older generation of queer folk who got to lead fully out lives. And so that's kind of new, I would say. And yeah, I mean, I think, while there are these projects and organizations, they're sort of the exception and not the rule. And so I don't know if there's just this like permanent infrastructure that can exist, where it's just routine for young people and older folk who are both identifying as queer to be able to interact. And so, while I do think it should be part of Pride, I also think it should be more, integrated year round so that it's not just this tokenized once a year thing like so many other things during Pride happen to be. And also, because so many things are happening during Pride, it can get lost. And so, like, it seems really important that it should be happening every week or every month. So, yeah, I think there's room for improvement, but there's also, organizations already doing that. And I hope more continue to do so.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I was having that conversation with my editor uh, about how right now they are trying to erase us. They're trying to erase our history and how it is vitally important that one that we are capturing our history right now, and that we also are tapping in with our elders so that we still have the stories like they're, you know what I mean. And so because if there's no one left to tell it and nobody told you the story, then you don't know to tell it, right, to keep it going, to keep it preserved. And so I think that's really an important thing. And like
Totally.
you know what I'm saying, when I was growing up, I didn't have that either, like elders who I could speak to about where we had been and what we had done. A lot of things I didn't know until later on in life. And so I definitely think that we are at a time where um, we do have the opportunity to pour into our youth about, our history and the things that we have contributed to in this country and in this world. So yes.
Yeah, and I mean, just want to add to that. I think to come back to what you started with in the beginning, like that sort of was my vision with this book, that it's like a coffee table book, so it can be really, appealing visually and fun almost, but it's also like really historical and like educational. And so I was trying to make, you know, not to be like silly, but make history fun and easy to like absorb in a way. So yeah, that was sort of the point.
Definitely. Oh, because today the attention span is like that. You know what I'm saying? Like visual get you further than, you know what I'm saying, sometimes the written
Yeah,
form of things. So
absolutely.
let's see. You have an image of Jimmy Daniels who used entertainment primarily to make his way. The image reminds of the Met Gala's recent homage to Black Danialism. How do you think the Met did with handling of the subject matter, and do you see this show up often in your searches? What makes it so special?
Yeah, I haven't actually made it to the Mets exhibit on Black Dandyism yet, but it's high on my list of to-dos this summer. So I can't speak on the exhibit really itself, but I think like many of us, I did, peer and ogle over all of the incredible looks at the Met Gala red carpet. I think I'm still, thinking every single day about Janelle Monáe's outfit and just how that looked so incredible.
Yes.
Also, like, Coleman Domingo's nod to Andre Leon Talley. So, like, there was this, these nods to historical figures as well. Um, and yeah, I think generally I was excited to just see Black Dandyism be front and center of a major Met exhibition and not just sort of like, a small footnote or a piece of some other bigger exhibition. And I think it does relate to the research and the things you can find in the book. Anytime I did research or dipped into sort of Harlem Renaissance oriented collections, at the like Schomburg Center or, looking at photos taken by Carl Van Vechten, who took a lot of pictures of Harlem Renaissance figures, you'd come across images of sharply tailored Black folk who were also queer or queer adjacent. And so, yeah, Jimmy Daniels was definitely one who I think people don't know enough about and should. But another one I really want to mention who I'm obsessed with is Gladys Bentley, who I think I read somewhere that Madonna's Met Gala look was a nod to her and her like tailored tuxedos. And so, yeah, I think also just throughout the book, we see the trend of Black folk setting the fashion bar high always. They were, you know, outspoken drag ball participants. They became later ballroom icons with like Pepper LaBeija and Paris Dupree and Willie Ninja. And
Mm,
so, just Black dandyism is totally, part of queer history and part of fashion history just in general. And so I think having a Met Gala built around it can be really exciting and interesting and important.
absolutely. Uh, you make some reference to a major mafia crime family owning queer spaces. Why do you think they were drawn to our world and keeping our spaces going?
Right, yes, the mafia. The mafia, they didn't really stumble into queer nightlife by accident. They were kind of following just a very familiar business formula to them already, which was basically find a cash-rich market that mainstream capital won't touch and use their kind of political muscle to control it, and then squeeze every revenue stream from them that it can possibly offer. And we really see that like directly affect queer spaces once prohibition ended in 1933 because mafia was really running those prohibition places. Selling liquor all of a sudden became legal again in establishments, so they couldn't really make their profit running these underground speakeasies anymore. And so that's when they sort of are like, okay, what's the next nightlife space that we can really take over? And that's when they really just start controlling all the gay bars and the lesbian bars. And that really continues until the 1970s, I would say, which is when the New York State, at least in New York, the New York State Liquor Authority starts to, it's still, denying licenses to bars where homosexuals are going. And so it really made it difficult for queer people to own their own bars. And so mafia is still kind of taking advantage of that. And so there's definitely like mafia families specifically in New York, like the Genovese family, who are kind of running a whole bunch of spots, and they including the Stonewall Inn, and they're just really involved. And so I think their main thing is how to make money, how to take advantage of people who have no power, uh, you know, water down drinks, basically skimming off the top kind of thing.
Mm.
Uh, yeah, and even like many queer people, it was not safe for them to be publicly out with their jobs, and so the mafia could also take down their names if they went to a gay bar and use that against them and shake them down for money too. So there were just like so many opportunities of people who were disadvantaged who could just be taken taken advantage of,
Advantage
so to
of.
speak. Yeah, but I think on the same front, a lot of these queer spaces couldn't have existed at all if the mafia wasn't involved. So it's this sort of like catch 22 of like they were kind of harming the queer community, but they also fostered spaces where the queer community could really find themselves. And so, you know, we sort of also have to be thankful for them in a way. Um, and then, that's when, the riots at Stonewall take place. And then after that, queer people really start to reject mafia owned spaces and begin to open their own gay bars. And I think one of my favorite stories in the book is also shows that like even though the mafia was running queer spaces, they sometimes formed genuine connections with the queer
Mm.
people. And so there's an example of her name was Anna Genovese. She was the wife of the Genovese crime head, and she was running some of these sort of female impersonation, male impersonation spaces in the 50s. And she ended up dating a lot of these male impersonators, and I think she even bought one of them a car. So like she kind of developed this connection with these butch lesbians at the time. So sometimes these lines were less black and white.
It that was amazing to me, that part about, because I never knew that either, that the mob was involved in a lot of those places and scenes, right? So, and about the the sometimes the grain of lines, and starting to build these connections and relationships, right? Because it's like two things can be true at one time, that kind of thing, right?
Exactly.
So You're taking advantage of us, but you've also created this space for us to be. So
Yeah, you're protecting us and hurting us at the same time. Exactly.
the American way, the American way.
Exactly.
I think you kind of answered this one earlier. Um, as you did your research into the project, you could have just written a book, but you chose imagery. What? How do you think it impacts those who have the opportunity to pick it up?
Yeah, I mean, I think that touches back to what, like I said, I was trying to make, history and educational content also accessible and fun and digestible. And so putting imagery front and center really shifts that from just being sort of a like reference textbook that people probably won't read to just this more like portable visual exhibit that people can flip through, like, and you don't have to read the whole thing in one shot. Each venue has its own, 1 or 2 or 3 page spread, so like you can just be like, I'm going to look at one a week or whatever. And so that's, you know you can skip around. You don't have to like read it from front to back.
Front to back.
Yeah, and it's like the very, trite saying of a picture's worth 1,000 words. And I think, historically, especially like when queer people haven't seen themselves represented in history, it's important to see a black lesbian dressed in a tuxedo from the 1930s, like that we were there looking like that all along. And so that is also really helpful beyond just reading about that story. Um, so yeah, I think it's really just important for queer people to see what these spaces look like, what the people who went to them look like, how it's not that different than it is today. Uh, and yeah, just give different points of entry to this kind of history so that it's a broader audience can be accessed.
Definitely, I like I said, I definitely enjoyed it. I definitely learned some things I didn't know. It sent me on a path to research some things, and so
Great.
yeah, I was like, okay, I'm this is it. I'm digging this book. Like I got 1,000 tabs in the book by now.
I
Like
saw that. I was impressed. Yeah, I love that.
yes, I'm talking about all in. I have been I probably, like you said, you don't have to start from cover to cover, and I probably have picked it up every day since I got it, and every time I pick it up, I see something new, or something I already looked at hits me in a different way, and then I'm down to research again. And so for that, I thank you. I appreciate your work. Um,
Thank you.
Telling people where they can pick it up. Where can they just go to? Where can they get it? Because they need to get it.
That's a good question. I'm still figuring that out too, to some extent. But yeah, it's at most major book retailers, Barnes and Noble, Amazon. But also check your local bookstores, queer bookstores. I'm always pushing for queer-owned bookstores to be the one you go to first. But yeah, whatever's convenient for you, depending where you are. But if you just search for the title, you should be able to find it.
Awesome. Got any projects in the works?
Right now I'm still, promoting this book. And then I also run, which sort of came before the book, this Queer Up in Here Instagram that I'm still very much keeping active and growing. And that, I think I've covered more than like 1,000 spots there. So it's just this ever growing project. But for now, I think that's keeping me busy enough. Yeah. We'll
All
see
right.
where I go after that.
All right, y'all heard that Queer Happens Here has an Instagram. Y'all need to go check that out too. Y'all need to tap in, plug in. Thank you so much for sitting down with me. I so much appreciate it. Thank you so much. And all right,
Thank
guys,
you.
you are so welcome. All right, guys. So until the next time, y'all do me a favor and go read a book.